Today we're back with all the latest NHL trade rumors. Even though free agency is well underway, there's still lots of big names that have not been moved. Today we're looking at the latest on guys like Jack Eichel, Vladimir Tarasenko, Jake Debrusk. Could Marc Andre Fleury be moved again? We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're taking a look at the latest NHL trade rumors. Now, we've had a lot of trade activity really in the last couple of weeks here, but there's still some decent big names that are rumored to be moved that is almost a given will happen here at some point. So we're going to look at the latest updates on them, and we have a couple of players as well that we haven't really talked about in some time. I want to start off first up with the Ottawa Senators. Now, there is a lot of speculation, and like I said, this is a player we talked about once before a while back, but speculation has picked up again here that former first-round pick back in 2016, Logan Brown, likely will end up getting moved from the organization. Now, he was on the protected list for the Ottawa Senators during the expansion draft, which I was a little bit surprised by, just because if they want to move him, I don't see there being a very big return, and they could have exposed him thinking that maybe Seattle would take him rather than you lose young, promising goaltender Joey Daccord. Now, they may have taken Daccord anyway, hard to say, but still, Logan Brown's a 6'6" center iceman with some decent offensive upside, but he's often injured and has been one of those guys since he's been drafted has had a hard time being consistent and living up to his potential. There could be a variety of reasons for that, but many think that he and his family and agent are kind of not happy with the lack of opportunity he's received, and he wants to be moved. Now, he has received his qualifying offer. He's a restricted free agent at the moment, but has not signed or accepted. I mean, at this point, as far as negotiation tactics go, he really doesn't have any leverage to get more money than he would have been receiving on the qualifying offer. So some are surprised that he has not already signed it. But, at that point, he's probably holding off, waiting to maybe be traded, and he can work out something with the next team that holds his rights. I mean, it's hard to say what kind of market there is for Logan Brown. I would think mostly like a young rebuilding team. So a team like Buffalo, a team like Detroit, maybe a team like New Jersey, like one of the teams near the bottom of the standings that are going through a lot of changes right now, might want to add a big young potential center. I mean, at this point with the Senators, like, he's probably not going to have much of a future based on the depth charts and where things are at. They are rumored to be wanting to add in a more experienced center, but they have obviously Josh Norris, Shane Pinto, Colin White. They still have Chris Tierney in the organization. So at this point, there's not much room for Logan Brown with those other guys playing ahead of him. He got an opportunity at the end of last season and didn't look good. He had a really hard time with the pace and just the overall effort. Just he really questioned where things are at with him. So will we see a Logan Brown trade out of Ottawa and have this former first-round pick finally get a fresh start somewhere else? Bruce Garriock of the Ottawa Sun firmly believes it's likely going to happen sometime this offseason before training camp starts. Where he goes is anybody's guess at this point, but I really think we're only looking at the teams, like I mentioned, that are near the bottom, looking for players to kind of rebuild here and see if they can find some potential magic. So we'll see what happens, but Logan Brown probably won't be back with Ottawa this year. Moving on to our next player, I want to look at the Boston Bruins, and what does the likelihood now that Jake Debrusk be traded get really ramped up? I think based on what we've seen from Boston in free agency, I think the odds just really skyrocketed that they're planning to move Debrusk, and I'm a little bit surprised they haven't moved him already. However, they probably wanted to wait until free agency was, kind of cooling off here to make sure they got the players they were targeting and that they could replace him, because they may not be able to get an NHL player in return for him. It really depends, right? A lot of deals now are kind of situations where players are being traded for picks and prospects. It might be difficult to get an NHL quality player back that you find as a comparable. So it might be easier to trade them if you don't have to do that. So obviously we already know they have their top line of Bergeron, Pasternak, and Marchand. Those three guys are still there. Taylor Hall re-signed. They still have Craig Smith. They're missing David Krejci, who they're rumored to be bringing back on a short-term deal, but that's not official yet, so we can't say that with any kind of certainty. But if Krejci does come back, there's your top six right there. And then, of course, they brought in some other players through free agency. They got Eric Howla, Nick Foligno. They still have Charlie Coyle. Then you still have some other guys that can play in your bottom six, obviously like Wagner and Frederick and Curtis Lazar. And then you have other depth pieces as well, like a Carson Kuhlman, and we haven't even mentioned Debrusk yet. So they're kind of squeezing them out, in my opinion. So I would think with all the talk that we've seen about the Debrusk trade, that I think it's more likely to happen now than ever. Now, I know many people always thought, and it made sense, I thought it as well, that when the trade finally happened, if it did, he would likely be traded for a defenseman, considering that's where their needs were. But they've also addressed some of those needs through free agency as well. I mean, obviously the right side's pretty solid with McAvoy and Carlo. They have Matt Grzelcyk on the left side, and they brought in guys like Mike Riley, who they got at the deadline, and then re-signed him, so he's still there. They brought in Derek Forbort, who's a good-sized, steady physical defenseman as well. Could they use another dynamic D-man back there? Sure they could. They did lose Jeremy Lauzon, but they still have Connor Clifton. They do have enough D back there. It's not like they really need one, but if there's an opportunity to upgrade, of course you would take that all day long. So maybe it's a combination of Debrusk and one of their other D-men going in a trade for a more dynamic D. It's hard to say. But if you look around the league and the teams that might be interested in that kind of trade, it's really kind of hard to imagine where he could go that would be a great fit and that would bring back that kind of return that you're looking for. I mean, you look at teams like the Coyotes, like I said, the Sabres, the Devils, the Red Wings. They're the teams that have the roster needs or the cap space to do something like this. And I'm not really sure if you look at those rosters that you really see a glaring player that sticks out as a good target or return. I mean, like the Coyotes are not moving Jacob Chychrun, and he'd probably be the only defenseman they would have that would be of interest. I mean, you look at New Jersey, they've made several moves within their roster, especially on the back end. They've obviously just traded Will Butcher. I mean, would they maybe consider moving Damon Severson? I mean, that would be a good move, but next they would probably prefer a left shot defenseman anyway. So do the Devils have that D? Not really. The Red Wings don't really have that player either. So it's hard to imagine where he could go. Now, there's other teams looking for forwards, don't get me wrong. It's not like he couldn't go to a different team, but it's just hard to pinpoint exactly where exactly the best fit could be. I mean, you could look to a team like the Ducks. They could be a team that could move a defenseman. There could be others as well. So hard to say, but I just think it's fair to say, based on all the moves we've seen in free agency from Boston, they have a really crowded forward group, and with all the talk and speculation about Debrusk being on the move for quite some time and the Bruins being frustrated with his inconsistency, that the time seems inevitable and the writing is on the wall. So we'll see what happens, but where do you think Jake Debrusk ends up? Do you see a trade finally coming to be here? Now, there's also talk that Marc Andre Fleury, who was just traded to Chicago, could still possibly end up in Pittsburgh. And to be completely honest, it is a possibility. Now, all you have to look at is this. What if he doesn't want to play in Chicago and he tells the Blackhawks, I will not report to training camp. I'm considering retirement. Either trade me or I'm retiring. I mean, he could give them that ultimatum. I mean, Marc Andre Fleury is probably one of the nicest people you'll ever meet and one of the nicest people in hockey. It's hard to imagine him having that kind of conversation, but if it's that important to him, I can see him doing that, or at least his agent, Alan Walsh, will do it for him. That's a possibility here. I mean, we know he was blindsided by this trade. He did not want to go. He wanted to stay in Vegas. But many feel that the only other team he would really go to without kicking up a fuss would be Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was home to him for a long time. For a lot of ways, it's like the place where him and his wife really kind of grew up, had their children and all that. Like, it's still kind of a second home to them. That would make sense. He could go back and finish things out with his old friends like Crosby and Malkin and Letang, etc. Get the band back together, so to speak. And you know what? It could happen. All you really need to do here, you look at the Penguins cap space and say, well, how can they tack on a $7 million player? That would be pretty difficult, but you got to remember something. Obviously, a goaltender would have to go to Chicago, the likely being Tristan Jarry. I mean, Tristan Jarry's making a decent amount of money. You subtract his salary, and now you're getting closer to being able to make it work. Then you maybe bring in a third team as a broker to rent some of their cap space. Basically, it's only 1 year on the contract. I'm sure teams like the Seattle Kraken, for example, maybe a Detroit or one of those teams, if they get something in return, they could probably retain a little bit of that salary. Suddenly, if you move out, $3 to $4 million in income going out as part of the trade, and then on top of that, you get a situation where Pittsburgh can give some kind of an asset, either a prospect or a second, third round pick or something like that, to Seattle or Detroit or one of those teams for taking a couple $1 million in cap space for 1 year. Then you can make it work. It's just that simple. So it's not impossible to do. And I really think that the only way this is going to happen is if he does not want to go to Chicago. But I've seen reports already that Pittsburgh is very interested in this. They were also caught by surprise that this trade went down because they wanted to make this trade happen themselves. like a year ago, and it couldn't happen for whatever reason. They couldn't reach a deal. Vegas wouldn't pull the trigger. I think ownership blocked it. I don't think Fleury had any kind of say in that because he only can block so many teams, and I don't think they're one of them that was on his list. So it couldn't happen if Bill Foley didn't get involved in Vegas. So it seems like Pittsburgh's motivated to try to make it happen. We know they wanted to upgrade goaltending. It was right at the top of their list of priorities. And I said there are reports that they're trying to investigate this to figure it out. So, obviously they can't tamper with Fleury being under contract to another team, but I guess they can maybe put feelers out there that they'll make a deal work if he doesn't really want to go there. I'm not sure how they can do that legally, but a lot of things happen behind the scenes. Look at free agency. Look at all the deals that were lined up when there's no interview period this year. Like the NHL's had that before, where they had a window where teams and players could talk but not make deals official. We didn't have that this year, but look at the deals that were ready to be announced on the first minute of free agency being opened. It was crazy. 1 or 2 days ahead of free agency even kicking in, we had all the NHL information leaked through NHL insiders about where players were going. We knew quite a few deals before they were ever made official, but we'll see what happens. The Penguins are interested. If he doesn't want to go to Chicago, I really do feel it's a real possibility. Now on to Jack Eichel. Now Jack Eichel's a unique player, the top name on the trade bait boards that has not moved yet. We've seen some information that the trade talks have been really quiet. Now that's come from a couple of different NHL insiders saying that over free agency the last couple of days that it's really cooled down. At the draft, there was all kinds of talk about trades revolving around Jack Eichel. Nothing came to be. The Sabres still didn't get what they wanted. And I've seen some teams talk to reporters anonymously saying that the asking price they feel is absolutely ridiculous. And until it comes down, they're not budging. I know Michael Russo of The Athletic is reporting that right now it looks like Minnesota is out, at least for the time being, because the asking price is just, astronomical. They're not getting anywhere. They're not budging. They're this late in the season. Off season, and nothing is budging, and it's frustrating when you're the other teams trying to break them and you can't do it. So it doesn't mean they're out forever, but I think for right now they're focused on other things because they're not confident at all they can make it work. However, there are still teams that are in the mix, and when I say in the mix is that they want to make it happen, and they're going to continue negotiating and trying. Obviously, no guarantee it happens, but we're looking at teams like Vegas. Vegas is still out there. You've got the Rangers. You've also got some other teams in there as well. I don't think you can really say too much about Calgary anymore. They've been quiet, but like Anaheim, still very much interested. The problem with the Ducks is until they want to include Trevor Zegras, I don't see the Sabres pulling the trigger. But Vegas is another team. Like I still say, you need to watch Vegas. They're technically over the cap right now because they traded for Evgeny Dadonov from Ottawa, so they can be over the cap by 10% during the offseason, so they're technically fine at the moment. But still, they never got their centerman. They made some moves this offseason. They picked up a guy like Nolan Patrick. But if that team really wants to be a cup contender, they need a top center iceman. There's no doubt about it. That's what they're missing. It was pretty obvious in the last couple of playoffs. Now, with the additional players, though, that they've added on the wing, it makes a lot more sense. The reports that we were hearing from the Hockey News, from Ryan Kennedy, saying he had sources saying that the asking price between Vegas and Buffalo on an Eichel trade was a winger believed to be Riley Smith, young defenseman Nicholas Hague, as well as young prospect Peyton Krebs, and a first-round pick. And I said, you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if there was even one more asset in there. Maybe it's a second-round pick, or maybe it's a lower-level prospect, or one other thing added in there. But now, with the moves they've made, it's going to have to probably be 2 NHL roster contracts going back the other way. The Sabres have kind of painted themselves in a corner here. They've had teams go out that were interested and spend a whole bunch of money in free agency because of the lack of options of getting this deal done. So now the Sabres, if they want picks and prospects, they're not going to be able to get that. And they seem content to let Eichel sit and wait, and it's just making him and his agent that much more frustrated. So to me, like I said, all those teams, they're still in the mix. But the Vegas one, to me, is become the most interesting because of how they've done their offseason here. They have more assets and more NHL contracts that they can trade to kind of make this deal a little bit a combination of NHL players that can play right now as well as future prospects. Like if they throw in 2 wingers, or if they throw in 2 NHL contracts, as well as Peyton Krebs, as well as Hague, as well as a first-round pick, that's a pretty good haul. At the end of the day, that might be what it very well comes down to. And I still think it's possible that they can get themselves in the mix here, make that happen. Now, the Rangers, I think, really still want to make it happen, but again, they're not going to budge on the asking price. Those defensemen that the Sabres are insisting on having in there, they're just not having it. It's just that simple, and they don't seem to want to budge on that. So, again, it's all about asking prices. Not that these teams don't want to make it happen, and even though the talks are a little bit quiet right now, these teams are still pushing. It's just doing so a little less aggressively, trying to wait out Buffalo to see if we can get something done. But I would imagine here in the near future, if not already, that there's going to be pressure from Eichel and his agents to get this done. Otherwise, it's going to make things that much more messy if we get closer to training camp and it's still not resolved. Now, lastly, I want to touch on Vladimir Tarasenko. Now, he's still believed to be very much out there. Another article from Jeremy Rutherford of The Athletic that came out late last night is talking about the fact that they're looking at sources from the team here, talking to Rutherford, saying that, you know what, at this point, they've waited too long, and Doug Armstrong is overvaluing Tarasenko and asking way too much. The fact that they're, at this point, not really coming down on their asking price is really hurting things, and teams are going in other directions. Like I said about Eichel, when teams are getting frustrated because the price doesn't change, they can't be confident they're going to get something done. They have to go another route, and then they're out of the picture because they've already made other moves to satisfy what they're looking for. Now, the other thing that they feel really hurt Tarasenko's value is the fact that they exposed him in the expansion draft, and Seattle didn't bite. To me, I would have had conversations with Seattle about taking him to make sure, because now they're saying, well, look, Seattle could have taken him for nothing, and they didn't, so why should I give you assets in return? Like, they could end up in a situation that they might have to be in that kind of predicament, and I'm sure that Doug Armstrong doesn't want that. I mean, Marc Andre Fleury was basically given away for nothing. A little bit of a different scenario in the fact that they really needed that cap space, and that deal was all about cap space, whereas this scenario is a little bit about cap space, but it's mostly about the player wanting to get traded and get moved. So obviously, that's a problem, and the longer they wait, the worse this is going to be, the lower the return is going to be as well. They've already lost Jaden Schwartz. They've already lost Mike Hoffman. They signed Brendan Saad today, but still, like, Tarasenko needs to get this deal done to move on. Now, it's believed there's still about 3 teams in the mix. It looks like there was probably 4 or 5. A few have dropped out, though, because of things taking so long and the price not changing. But the Devils are still, to a degree, in the mix. They've been one of those teams, and Carolina's in there, and the Islanders. Now, the Islanders have been radio silence this whole free agency period. We haven't heard anything from Lou, even though we have speculation that he's likely signing Zach Parise. He should be re-signing Paul Mary. They're trying hard to bring back Casey Cizikas, but none of that's been confirmed as of yet. I don't know if they're just going to do one big announcement, like a big, kind of news dump, so to speak, on us and give it to us all at once. I don't know what they're doing over there, but it's been complete and utter silence on the Islanders side of things, so we don't know what's going on, but they are believed to be in the mix here. They're one of the teams that have been interested since the get-go, since that news broke that they were, that he wanted out and wanted a fresh start. So we'll see, but that trade is also still on the forefront, and because of the radio silence on the Islanders, I do think that means they're working on something big and that they're trying to get it done, and Lou doesn't let any secrets out, so that's could be very well be a part of that. But like I said, I wouldn't completely rule out Carolina or New Jersey in the mix for his services too. So we'll see what happens, but that's all the latest on all these players right now. Like I said, we're still likely going to see some pretty significant trades in the coming weeks here as we kind of round out the offseason. So stay tuned for further updates as we wait for these things to get resolved and these players to be moved. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news and rumors on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.